por mi madre me lo tienen que dar, esta noche me lo tienen que dar.
She is the founder of Less Equals More. It's a lifestyle consultancy that helps people create organized, minimalist spaces in their homes and offices. She encourages her clients to work from a deeper understanding of what brings them meaning by incorporating elements of sustainability, personal finance, and mindfulness. But here today to share her take on the intersection of creativity and sanctuary is Dara. Please welcome her to the stage.
I'm going to tell you a story, and it involves a lot of nudity and a very creepy basement, and how my minimalist lifestyle led the way to creative freedom. But it all began in the cave. And the cave was the very endearing name that my brother and sister gave to my teenage bedroom. This was actually my first sanctuary, a place where I could create safely and where I had this sort of ethereal space to expand and to really be myself. And this was also the place where I tapped into the inner creative sanctuary in my heart. But this was before I had any idea about the strength in the creative sanctuaries that we build in community. So let's go to the cave for a second. There I was, curly-haired, frizzy curly hair, and I was treating creativity as a solitary sport. I would spend hours in my bedroom making friendship bracelets. I explored the art of Japanese paper folding, origami. I was very good at it. I would doodle the lyrics to songs that I loved on the radio, and I would write my own songs. I learned how to play classical guitar on my mom's old guitar that she handed down to me. And of course, I was a teenager, so I wrote a lot of lovelorn, angsty poetry. But unlike a lot of teenagers, I would assume, I wrote a series of short stories called Private Eye Dara, where I was a gun-toting detective. And this was before I moved to Texas. So this was a space where I could just be who I was, where I could let the tears flow, where I could sort of make sense of my hormonal emotions, and really the fact that I was a very logical child. I wasn't a feelings-based person. I was a very logical-based person. And so feelings to me were very much a nuisance, and my emotions were a nuisance to me, and they really bothered me, and I had to find a way of making sense of them by myself. And creativity helped me do that in this beautiful cave that was my creative sanctuary. And then I abandoned it all, and I went to college, and I studied environmental science, and I decided I was going to save the planet, and I left school and started my career at the U.S. Green Building Council, where I worked on sustainable buildings and neighborhoods. It's also the time that I really established my minimalist practice. I saw how minimalism, at least my version of minimalism, really would focus on what's most meaningful to me. And it trimmed away all the distractions, the physical distractions, but also the sort of life distractions, like all that stuff on our calendars and unnecessary relationships. And I also saw how minimalism really just cut out waste, which I hated. And I'm talking about all types of waste, time and otherwise. And so here I was, a minimalist, sustainability, working in my career, and I got married at the age of 24. And what I didn't realize when I got married was that, and neither did my husband, but was diagnosed very soon afterwards with dissociative identity disorder, colloquially known as multiple personalities. And so for the next 9 years, it was a struggle. I was filled with anxiety every single day, not knowing what to expect. And I was working really hard on my career, and I was responsible and the caretaker for my husband. And despite being married, I had many, many lonely nights at home. And one of those lonely nights, and this one I don't know if it was whiskey or wine, but there was definitely alcohol involved. Alcohol was sort of my creative elixir, a sort of false sanctuary, if you will, but it worked. It was effective many of the times. And that night, I was doodling in a journal that I had recently picked up. I mean, I didn't have a creative sanctuary anymore, but in this moment, it came to me. I was to write an album about living and being married to and being in love with a man who had multiple personalities and my experience of that. And this was to be named Fragments, and I wrote down all the topics I would cover, and it was going to be a trip-hop album. And for those of you who are not familiar with trip-hop, this is a genre of music. It's slow-tempoed. It's kind of a mix of hip-hop and electronica fused together. It was popularized in the 90s in Bristol, England by artists such as Portishead and Tricky. So I had a very specific vision for what this album was going to be. And then the craziest thing happened. I did it. I wrote the songs. I wrote 12 songs. I mean, it was first lyrics here and there, and then they turned into verses and choruses. I had 12 songs. 11 made it on the album, but I had 12 songs. And what do I do next? Well, I was a minimalist, so I wasn't going to go out and do all the things right away, right? I had to figure out how am I going to make the music for a trip-hop album. I only knew how to play guitar. So I went to a music shop that sold old equipment, and I bought a very old, very cheap synthesizer and a mic stand and a mic, and I just realized I needed a new creative sanctuary, and that creative sanctuary was my creepy basement. And I would go down, and it was really creepy. I'm very afraid of insects, and it had insects and dead insects, and it was unfinished. At the time, my husband and I owned our house, so we hadn't redone the basement yet. It was gross. I only went down there to do laundry. But here I was, mic stand, and I'm pulling together melodies and just kind of mapping out chords. And as I heard my voice sing the terrible pain that I had been in, I realized I had to end my marriage. And that's what creativity does, right? It kind of brings forth and it helps us analyze. And so I ended my marriage, and just so you all know, he was doing a lot better then. He's doing fine now. He's okay. But it had taken a toll. And then, strangely, everything in the world opened up to me. Within a couple of months, I met somebody who was also an amateur musician and was starting to produce beats. And he offered to create all the beats for my album for free, and we collaborated together on that. A couple months after that, I found myself in my office. I'm still working at U.S. Green Building Council. My office, as you might imagine, bare, minimalist office, save for, the fortune cookie slips of paper that sometimes you save. Well, I had saved one, and it said, "Be the change you wish to see in the world," the Gandhi quote. And it was the only thing attached to the wall in my office. And I had one of those beautiful mind moments where I'm like, wait, I'm being the change I wish to see in the world, and I want to have more freedom in my life, because the more and more free I've been feeling, I want more and more and more of it. And I had always wanted to be an entrepreneur, but didn't feel like I could do that while I was married because I was supporting my husband. And so now I realize this is all coming together. I'm going to start my own business to teach other people how to become minimalists. I had already been professional organizing on the side. I knew how to do it. And so not only would I be the change I wish to see in the world, I can encourage others to do the same. And then this would also give me time freedom and the ability to work on all of my creative projects. And I did it. I quit my job. And my husband and I sold our house, and we were the luckiest people in the world because we sold at the perfect time and we made a bunch of money. And then that could fund me to travel and do all the things that I wanted to do. I'm also a minimalist, so I'm very, very frugal. So here I was, the last night before moving out of the house. The house sold in one day. And by the way, being a minimalist really helps when you have to move. It was great. So it's the night before the move, and I decide to do my first open mic night. All the songs for the album weren't completed, but they were almost there. And I feel very comfortable talking to you all right now. This is very easy for me. I could be here all morning. I won't, don't worry. But singing in front of the public is very scary for me, but I did it. And I sang there, and it was strange because it was the first time I'm like bringing my art out into the world and seeing what happens. This was interesting because like creativity had been a solitary sport, but now, wait a second, things are shifting a little bit. So a couple months later, I had my first clients. A couple months later, I re-met an old friend of mine who was a musician around town, and he was producing albums for local artists and his friends. And I told him about what I was working on. He said, you can record your album in my home recording studio for free. I just brought him a 6-pack every time I came. This was amazing. So right before we started recording, I decided to do something else. And by the way, guys, I know you've been really wondering where the nudity comes in. We're about to get there. Ever since I was like in high school, college, I had this sort of romantic, artistic fantasy of being a nude model. I just always wanted to be like in an art class, seated there, posing, and have people draw me. What better time to do this, now that I had the freedom and the desire for this creative pursuit? So I did what anybody else would do. I Googled it, how to become a nude model. And up comes a WikiHow page detailing exactly how to do this. It was amazing. And the first thing you do is you create a resume. Now, what is on a nude modeling resume? Well, basically you want to show people that you have physical prowess, you have some stamina and body awareness, and that you'll show up on time, that you're a responsible person. So I made my resume, you send it out to art studios and art schools, and you wait. And then one day, Phyllis called. And Phyllis said, have you ever modeled before? And I said, no. She said, don't worry, because she worked at the Washington Studio School. I'm still in Washington, D.C. She worked there, but she said, I have my own group. Why don't you come and model for us? I'll teach you the tricks of the trade, and then you can model at the school. I said, perfect. So I got my model go bag ready, which WikiHow explained had to include a robe and slippers and a snack and some water and maybe a book to read during your break. So I go to Georgetown. It's a very posh area in DC, and cobblestone, sidewalks, and I crawl up the stairs of the tiny little place, and I open the studio door, and to my left is the area for the model, me, with pillows and other props, and on the other side is a gaggle of old ladies. And I was so happy because I knew these old ladies were gonna have a great time with me. Old ladies really like my hair for some reason. It gets them very excited. So I change into my robe, completely naked underneath, and Phyllis teaches me how to model. And she explains that the first thing you do are these gestures. These are very, very short poses to get the artist ready. And so she explained that you sort of torque your hips and you extend your arms in various ways that are difficult to do with a microphone in your hand, but look at me now. And I started to learn that I was becoming a shape for the artists, that I was inspiring ideas, that I was extending myself in this like dynamic stillness. And I loved it. This was so fun for me because I like to perform and I like to improvise, and I don't mind when old ladies look at me naked. And then we started doing some longer poses, and she showed me about other standing poses and doing seated poses and reclining poses, and it was a whole lot of fun. And right before I left, she handed me a wad of cash, and I was so happy. I was like addicted. And so she scheduled me to work at the Washington Studio School, and it was a wintry night in Washington, D.C. It was a wintry mix night, in fact, meaning that people in Washington, D.C., once there's precipitation that's cold, they go crazy. And so only 2 people showed up to this studio, and both of those people were grown men. So it was just naked little Dara and two grown men, and everything inside me screamed, stranger danger. But I realized that I was in a sanctuary, a creative sanctuary. And what I've learned over the past 7 years of modeling is that being in these studio spaces they're like one of the safest spaces I've ever been in. I get to be a muse. I get to have a relationship with the artists, and they in turn make sure that I'm comfortable, that the space heater is on, and that I'm offered an extra pillow. I feel respected, and I feel like we have this true creative relationship, and I love it. But let's get back to the album. So I'm modeling, recording the album, and eventually the album is done. And I have an album release party. And here's another situation where I have to not just make art and perform art, but I have to perform it in front of people. And these are my friends and family members. But I'm starting to get it. I'm starting to get how scary it is, but how important it is in the process to have these relationships and to speak to an audience and share things that I never wanted to share. And I gotta say, singing in front of my friends and family, a lot scarier than being naked in front of strangers. But I did it. And I'm so happy I did. And it really juiced me up because I was about to move to Austin, Texas. I wanted to change. I wanted even more freedom. I was getting a little greedy. And I drove the 3 hours here. And by the way, again, minimalism saved the day because it was very easy to pack up my Honda Civic with all of my worldly possessions, and I was off. And the first night, I stayed in the studio apartment that I rented here. And I went to sleep with a smile on my face because I just knew that this was the place for me. And I was so happy that I had followed this avalanche of freedom and this creative expression and found new sanctuaries. And this was going to be my sanctuary here. And it's been amazing. I've built a business here, and I've been the sort of minimalist muse for other people. And I've worked with a lot of creative people and really seen how this sort of logical brain that I have and the way that I organize things actually really helps people focus on their creativity. And again, this relationship is formed. And I've also met tons of amazing people here and made friends and built community. And I've gone to ecstatic dances. These are a different type of creative sanctuary. They're consent-based, drug-free arenas. And I've done so many just like cool activities here in Austin. And it's been incredible. But I haven't worked on my second album. I have been to maybe not even a handful of open mic nights. And I've had the creative sanctuaries of my dreams. I mean, I live in a beautiful minimalist space with high ceilings, incredible acoustics. But just a year ago, I sold my keyboard. And I feel terribly disappointed in myself. Just scratching down lyrics in fits and starts, but really not making any real effort. And I feel like I've abandoned the creative sanctuary in my heart. And that's a hard thing to say, but it's the truth. And sometimes life and these, 20-minute talks don't end in tied bows of answers. But I do want to leave this on a very positive note and some self-discovery. And what I've learned is we have these individual sanctuaries that are incubators. And they allow us to conceive and process and develop. And that is a very, very special thing. But without community, we don't have art studios or ecstatic dances or writing groups or open mic nights. Without the balance and support of these spaces that we build together, we don't have the magic of creative collaboration, where someone like me who can't paint can inspire figure lines and produce trip-hop albums. Creative sanctuaries are the communities like Creative Mornings, like the space that we're all in today. And in this space, I would love for you to take a card that some volunteers are going to hand out right now. But on this card, and really what I want you all to think about is your answer to this question. What or where is your creative sanctuary? And then once you have identified what it is, please, please hold it dear. Thank you. Oh.